So our next speaker is Josh. So Josh has 25 years of experience in healthcare. And today what he's going to talk about is he's going to share some lessons learned from how to actually conduct different types of engagements within healthcare, talking about AI, and also how to convey value associated to AI. So with that being stated, Josh.
Thank you. Volume good? All right. Get my orientation here. So yeah, just a real quick about me, just kind of give you a little bit of context. Right now I run a consulting practice where I work with healthcare startups, largely, medical device, a lot of clinical AI in the last couple of years, a lot of companies that are trying to kind of upfit their current stacks with AI, because VC and private equity is like, well, you don't get any money unless you do this. So working with equity partners through their portfolios, working with some other companies, larger companies that are in the healthcare tech space. So the healthcare market, and a lot of what I'm going to be talking about today is kind of the parallels of the healthcare market to markets that all of us are kind of familiar with. I mean, we're all kind of familiar with the healthcare space, but at the top, you have this really weird structure where we have like multiple ways for which we pay for the healthcare spectrum. Payers, multi-billion-a-year industry with all these payers. And these are the big Blue Cross Blue Shields and all these other companies. And then we have, of course, a federalized system, and then we have self-paid and charity. So a lot of weirdness there, a lot of places to land with AI to kind of fix some issues. And just to kind of give a sense, because I'm going to be mentioning some of these settings as we go along, you got primary care, which is all the clinics and the practices and outpatients, of which there's 120,000, right? And these are decentralized organizations who all need AI types of, or they have very similar solutions that you're familiar with, where you're going to have to like intake patients or customers, you're going to have to deal with payments, you're going to have to look up things, and so there's a lot of places for LLM to land there. Then you've got acute care, which is really the health systems and hospitals, of which there's like 6,000 entities there. And then you got surgery centers, about 10, 15,000 surgery centers. And this is where you go to get this kind of the care that we all know of, that you get from the hospital setting. And then there's post-acute, of which, this is skilled nursing. So you come out of the hospital setting, and maybe you go to a rehab center, or maybe you're in a skilled nursing facility for a while after a big surgery or something along those lines. There's 20,000 of those, right? And then there is kind of a last setting in this kind of ACO framework, which is the kind of hospital at home. And then you have a ton of other industries. I'm going to isolate one of these, biopharma, huge multi-billion-a-year in industry, and a lot of those are US-based companies that kind of serve this space. And then you have a whole host of others: behavioral health clinics, public health, retail, hospice, safety net. In a lot of ways, a lot of the healthcare that I'm going to be talking about today are those transactional types of environments where patients have kind of a pre-care journey where they're logging on to websites, they're uploading information, they're trying to find out information about their visit, having to go through payment structures. Then when you show up at the place, you have to be checked in, you have to have benefits checks, you have to have all these different kind of transactional processes. Never mind all the other areas within the hospital and some of these other settings. So because of the large, how big this industry is, you've got a lot of speculation and a lot of activity here. So just from a high level, just to kind of paint a picture around healthcare in the United States, about 20% of this of our GDP is in healthcare. Now, once again, that's payers and providers and how we pay for things and everything else. Right now, the annualized spend for private equity and venture capital is 50-something billion a year, right? So if you look at PE and venture, we're talking maybe 125 billion spent annually from within the United States. So 52 is a lot, right? So there's a lot of people that are directing money towards this marketplace. And so that means there's tons of companies kind of going. It employs about 14% of everybody in the United States, right? So this is a big market. It's touched by everyone. And we're kind of the first in the world in a lot. There's some bad things, but we're also first in the world with scientific investment. We have some of the best medical schools in the world. We have some of the best trained and cross-trained clinicians. So there's a lot that's going on. And so I mentioned some problems. We're the most expensive system per capita per user. About half of us are inadequately insured. There's all sorts of data breaches. All this data is really valuable. Labor shortages, particularly after COVID. Medical errors. There's enough medical errors on a weekly basis in the United States. Actually, it's on a daily basis within the United States. That's a 747 crashing every single day. You figured you'd hear about that if that was happening in the news every single day. That's how many medical errors we have. So this industry is ripe for something like, any high-tech technology coming in is going to find a place in healthcare and in these healthcare settings. And it's ubiquitous. They are everywhere. You can't go to a community and there's not some part of the infrastructure for healthcare. And so I tried to get the biggest font with the heaviest weight I could find. There's lots of money. There's lots of chaos in this environment. There's tons of data. There's tons of problems. There's tons of opportunity. And that's why this marketplace is so lucrative and why so many people are kind of focusing on this. So contrary to popular belief, hospitals are very sophisticated places. So you have clinical systems, you have IT infrastructure and operations, environmental systems, building systems, communications platforms, ERPs, building infrastructure, business apps, just from a software component. They have robotics, what ubiquitous, thing that's in every community you go to where there's a robotics platform, right? You got it over here in the hospital, you got it in Waynesville, you've got it in every community around here. And all of these systems have data and it's all interconnected, right? And so within a hospital setting itself, you have massive opportunities for finding, there's lots of challenges, lots of opportunities. And what's really unique about this environment, this is kind of a pitch for anybody who's in the development side or anybody in the private equity side or whatever, that healthcare is a really lucrative place to be. What's really unique is the personnel that's managing this. You have one CIO or one CIO organization who is managing all of this, right? So once again, you're looking to like a particular persona in an organization, and where are you gonna have an IT person that also manages helicopters and robotics and communications infrastructure in any other organization, right? So you also have a really unique set of personnel in these environments. So you have, at the top level, you have these clinicians who look at themselves as scientists. A lot of MDs have to publish, they have to work. So if you go to a hospital with a solution, you're going to be landing and sitting in front of clinicians who are also scientists, who are also big thinkers, who are thinking about these problems and these challenges they're facing. You also have a huge subset of clinical engineering that, in a lot of instances, these are the nurses. Average 300-bed hospital has 300 nurses operating through that staff, and a lot of them are cross-trained on all sorts of technologies. You have statisticians, demographers, and data scientists. These people have been in these organizations for 30 years. Data scientists on staff, every hospital for 30 years, right? So think about that in terms of if you're bringing a solution to these environments, you have a data scientist, you have people who understand these problems. Something really interesting is this new subset called informaticists. Usually that's either a chief nursing informaticist or a chief medical informaticist. This is someone who is a specialist on workflow as it relates to technology, as it relates to regulatory, as it relates to medical and clinical protocol. There are these experts there, and they are everywhere. Every hospital has them. And then finally, you have a lot of different subject matter experts who are focused on everything within that organization. You have subject matter experts on the financial systems, on the payment systems, on the regulatory systems. You also have strategy and innovation teams. A lot of hospitals are incubators for new technology. So if you're thinking in terms of developing for an environment, you could actually go to what would be essentially a private equity team within the hospital who has a fund of $700 million, right, to kind of dedicate and build technology. So anybody who is thinking about this space, you already have a team in these environments who are well aware of AI. AI has been deployed in these environments for years, for decades in some instances. I mean, obviously in spam filters and things like that. So right now you have different technologies that are being that are kind of spread out through mobile tech and medical device and health IT. From a high level, about 10% of all Fortune 500 companies are in the healthcare space, right? And some of these companies are exclusively focused on healthcare. They can be spread out across biopharma, et cetera, et cetera. There are a lot of people think, Epic and the EHR is kind of like the beginning and middle end of technology in a hospital. There are literally 10,000 other vendors who are servicing a space like the hospital space, right? So all of these technologies have, all different types of uses. In some instances like Baxter or Hillrom or some of these companies have tens of thousands of products in these environments, right? And they're all being upfit right now with AI because private equity and venture capital is like, well, we're not giving any money to anybody unless they have AI. So all these companies right now are I would say they're desperate, but they are certainly looking to upfit their entire product spectrum with what they can do with AI. In particular, like as it touches workflow in the hospital, as it touches processes, it touches administration, et cetera. So one interesting way for those of you who might not be in the space is there's a kind of front-end technology, and that really looks like what we would expect in a retail operation. So you're going to have like check-in and registration, appointment scheduling, chat bots, et cetera, right? And those are really great for the narrow NLP and ML kind of spectrum of solutions, one-offs. Generally, a hospital is not wanting to buy a particular one-off solution that they're going to fit into one component. They want something that kind of spreads across their entire product platform. But in a lot of these areas, the hospitals are and clinics and other types of entities in this space are looking for solutions, particularly from AI and ML and other things to kind of get them in this space, because a lot of consumers within the healthcare space are expecting the same degree of technology and the same experience that they would get from, paying a bill online with Duke Energy or something, right? Or going to Apple. So then there is a kind of central space, clinical, where we have, the EHR, we have clinical decision support, we have tons of medical devices, communications, labs, imaging, all these types of things. And that area is really ripe for ML and deep learning models and NLP. You've got some issues in that GUI middle that we'll talk about in a second, and then you've got back-end technologies. And in some instances, the back-end technologies, HIS, supply chain, but you're also dealing with HR, you're dealing with payment structures and blah, 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 blah. So tons of opportunity in this space for NLP and ML as well. And so you can conceivably develop applications that would be sitting in the front end or the clinical space or the back end. You don't have to be an expert on healthcare. You just have to be an expert on how to deal with data and move data from one place to the other, or make contextualized types of decisions. So regulatory oversight, the front end is not so difficult to develop in. There's a lot of course, privacy, but then FTC and FCC regulations as it relates to communications and that infrastructure. That environment is ripe for stepping into, and we're seeing a huge influx of technology trying to sell to the front end of clinics and hospitals and everybody else. On the clinical side, you start getting, and this is kind of silly because there's actually, the clinical side is one of the most heavily regulated areas in our entire economy. And there you're going to run into issues like, for instance, if you're doing clinical decision support or something on those lines, well, now you've got issues where FDA, and you're going to, 6 months to 18 months to get your product approved by the FDA for some sort of clinical decision support or something on those lines, that can slow down your development. That can slow down your whole process. There's a whole bunch of other kind of standards and regulatory component, but this space is a little bit harder to operate in, and we're not seeing as large a growth of technology in that environment. I'll talk more about the clinical side in a second. And on the back end, you're dealing, again, OSHA, NIST, some of the IRS, you're dealing with some of that kind of regulatory constraint. So once again, the front end, the back end, we're seeing tons of solutions being developed around ERP applications, around finances, controls, and that type of stuff. So clinical AI, let's break this down. There's still like this big push right now to try to classify and organize the different types of systems. The hospitals and health systems right now are very eager to get a classification so they can start writing papers and thinking about this and directing people towards companies. But there's not a lot of categorization happening right now. Chai is doing some of that work. But augmentation, there's some really big movements in this space. Personalized healthcare plans, we're seeing again, machine learning, deep learning type of models. The personalized healthcare plans was developed by Cleveland Clinic and is kind of the gold standard. A lot of different companies are kind of coming out of that operation. But one of the biggest, we're seeing almost 100% with drag and nuance, with dictation and that type of thing. Once again, it's funny to watch how some of these technologies have run through the process of being completely outsourced to India or Pakistan or some of these places, only to be completely re-engaged by AI internal at these orgs. So transcription is now in the EHR system. It's in every sort of patient encounter. There are companies that are developing mics for the ceiling that just capture everything ambiently. So that's a really interesting. There's another term, an augmentation essentially say, hey, we're going to take the onus off of the physician to go in and capture their notes later. We're just going to capture and add it, contextualize and add it to the note as we go through. Imaging is really interesting. Kind of radiological interpretation is now ubiquitous. There are probably no more radiologists who are being employed in hospitals in the same way, right? So we're looking at a near 100% employment of radiological, and basically that's just looking at an image, looking at pixels, seeing a dark mass, highlighting that, send it to a radiologist, they look at it, and then take it to the primary care. We're also seeing a lot of interesting things with diagnostics around skin cancers and other types of things. So diagnostics in particular, like clinical decision support, we're seeing a lot of different deterioration early warning systems. I've been working with a company for a couple of years on that kind of project around sepsis, early deterioration, around all-cause deterioration or detection. Cardiac arrest detection, and I'll talk a little bit more about these systems because these are very hard to sell into these environments because you're having to prove that you're not in a black box situation. You're having to prove that you're doing a lot of different work. And then a lot of predictive analytics around load balancing and operational efficiency. So we're seeing this kind of movement towards a better classification of systems within clinical, and then we're starting to see traction in the environment where, private equity is like, okay, we're going to have someone in our portfolio for each one of these, areas to kind of round it out. So, and some of the big players that we've seen over the years of Google and IBM and other players, but a lot of the systems, a lot of these companies are really small right now. A lot of the companies that are building and designing these are bespoke systems that are ripe for M&A, but not quite there yet because you got to have one thing for M&A, which is actual clients. So to kind of highlight some of the peculiarities, as we go through the kind of the sales cycle, the deal mechanics selling to a hospital can be really difficult. Now, why is the deal mechanics kind of important to a group of developers? Because the MVP that you're going to come up with in this setting, when it lands at a hospital, it's going to iterate in ways that you're not really suspecting. of the thousands of systems that a hospital may have in its applications, you're going to have to find a way to contextualize all the data within those systems. So we're talking structured data, unstructured data, all sorts of arrangements within these hospitals. And so the idea of setting an MVP and then setting it on its little path down the commercial lane is not really what's going to happen here. So a lot of companies actually are struggling on these early stages. Once they get their product out, they hit to the market, they start getting a lot of sales requests, and they're like, well, what's this? And so I've seen that firsthand. A lot of developers having issues with their code being kind of torn to pieces once you hit the commercial. Once you're doing marketing, I mentioned this kind of concept of references. Hospitals in particular have been burnt to death by early adoption. So they've been burnt by big data, big analytics. They all got burned on that deal. They're getting burned on all these regulatory knee-jerk kind of companies that kind of happen. So you need to be building references, and in a lot of instances, that means you need to buy your references. Cleveland Clinic's a great place. They'll let you give them your software for free. So sales applications, once you hit the sales aspect, you're going to have to think about a little bit bigger of a process. Instead of having these standalone products, you're going to have to integrate this with other partner agreements and other partner arrangements, and have to integrate with Epic, and have to get on what used to be called Epic App Orchard or whatever. And then finally, your implementation, you're hitting an environment that, yes, it may only take 60 hours for you to implement your IT from an IT perspective, but does the hospital have 60 hours of IT time to devote to you? Usually the answer is no. So you're looking at a process where it only may let's say 2 weeks to implement your product. Now it's taking 6 months. Now you're at the end of your adoption cycle and you haven't even implemented yet, and you have to explain that to your private equity and your boards, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a really difficult situation. And then the big one is adoption, getting adoption through that process at the end of your account management, and getting the retention. A lot of hospitals are only wanting to sign a 1-year deal. Well, if it takes 18 months to sell and 6 months to implement, you've just worked yourself out of this long sales cycle deal that you've been working on. So the other big issue here is interoperability and making all these systems operate together. In a lot of instances, it makes for very strange bedfellows. Like, hey, I want to send an alert to a cell phone. Why do I need the EHR? Well, the EHR is where all the data is coming from about this patient. Or why do I have to integrate with this third-party nurse call system? Because that's where the assignments are for the rights, roles, and privileges in the hospital. So this is an environment that's really ripe for investment. It's ripe for people who want to come in and make an impact and actually design really cool products, dealing with data, dealing with the efficacy component, dealing with issues with bias within the original documents that are being used as research to train your models. It's all a lot of work, but is it worth it? My contention is that yes, it's well worth the effort. So anyway, that's a quick pitch on why I think a lot of people should be doing their homework on healthcare these days. So, all right. Okay. Any questions, or should we just jump?
No, we got questions.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I know in some industries with integration partners, like whether it's wearables or the ERP, things like that, there's a fee. Are there any particular regions within the medical space that are lower in terms of the integration costs for the developers looking to enter into it?
Oh, sure. I would say so within the hospital system, you have a lot of health systems that are kind of operate as big enterprise organizations. And so selling into those places means that, okay, they may have 3 different EHRs, they may have 10 different whatever. And they also have these very complex departmental structures in the way that they're split out. So you may land in the ER, but that you may never expand beyond the ER. And if you can't expand or scale from the ER, then the system may not want you in the first place, if that makes sense. So there's an easier place to land, which would be in some of the less regulated sections of healthcare, which would be the 120,000 physician clinics, or skilled nursing facilities or whatever that might be more of a standalone org. I can go sell, 100 dental practices, and that's not even getting close to hitting kind of that market in terms of TAM, SAM, SOM. But at the end of that, I have 100 clients paying, $1,000 a month per user or whatever, whatever that structure is. So there's some areas where the deal mechanics also in a bit of, I guess, just less regulation, less regulatory oversight. The healthcare system, hospitals, that's where the regulations are. Payers, that's where the regulations are, if that makes sense. Roche and the big biopharma, that's where the regulations are. So if you're operating in some of these spaces, once again, that could be hospice, that could be any of the public health institutions, et cetera, you're going to get a much quicker deal mechanic situation and a lot more opportunities at bat. That makes sense.
Awesome. Back there.
Sorry, thanks. With all the players in the space has traditionally been not very uniform in integration. Everybody does their own thing.
Right.
There's some standards out there like FHIR for API, et cetera. Are you seeing adoption of that?
Yes.
And kind of the future of where healthcare is going so that it's easier interoperability between the players?
Yeah. There's big movements within the hospital and health systems right now. Smart on Fire took off like wildfire. And overnight created hundreds of companies because now you actually had, and instead of looking at the EHR as like this one repository of data, you now have this kind of HL7 stream or this uniform stream of data from which you can pull data and parse it from it. And there's a lot of regulatory, if you're watching the regulatory market, then that is often what leads to something like the massive adoption. There's also a true recognition amongst the healthcare elite within the hospitals that interoperability doesn't matter. I mean, the fact that we all agree that we're going to speak English doesn't mean that I can, shoot slang out at and you would understand it. So we're seeing a lot more of that, and Smart on Fire has changed every aspect of overnight. It created the clinical AI. Because right at that point, the only people that had access to the data were people like Epic, and they were creating some AI products early stage that failed miserably and led to some big problems for patients and physicians and health systems. So there's a regulatory movement. However, in the decentralized space of ambulatory or physician clinics and some of these others, you have a lot more leeway to kind of go into the space. Once again, if an appointment gets screwed up, patient's not going to die, right? So the risk is not super high, and so that kind of regulatory oversight's not very high there. So,
Question over here.
Just curious if you have any experience or any insight into, like Google and DeepMind and some of these other institutes are looking at like aggregated data and things of that nature. Is anyone working on, and I imagine Dragon is a good example of this, but is anyone working on like, how do we take the data that's unstructured in an EHR and then even within a hospital network analyze it, but then like globally across a population analyze it?
Yeah. So right now, a lot of models, let's say within clinical diagnostics, you're able to pull all of the data for the associated patient census. So you're able to see all of the vitals because the EHR is this kind of centralized location and we're kind of repository for this information. And it's contextualized around the patient, and it's contextualized around the patient's treatment plans and everything else as associated with a surgery or whatever. And so there's a high degree of structured data that is that salient data that's available right now around the patient census. But then a lot of the models are actually built on completely different data sets. Those models are built largely on medical research and other types of things that have been contextualized to try to get to the kind of heart of the matter of, asystole plus, person's weight plus their age. That's really simple, but now you have an algorithm that says, okay, now let's pop an alert into the EHR around this particular patient because they're showing that. But like we talked about multiple times today, there's tons of bias in these original medical studies. And so a lot of hospitals are like, well, how do we get unstructured data or other things? And there's this concept called human in the loop. And then, so for instance, you're going to populate what you think is going to be like an indicator of deterioration, let's say around sepsis. And the physician might look at that and go, nope, not an issue. And now it's incumbent upon that system to actually say, well, why? But it's not going to ask the physician. It's not going to get into an argument with the physician. It's going to go, oh, why? And the systems are being trained to look back across the spectrum and go, oh, there was a broad spectrum antibiotic given an hour ago. And so then the system is going to learn from that human in the loop process that says, oh, so there's a way to do this also with contextualization. And my hope is that a lot of AI will drive us. We're going to see big holes in the data. Like for instance, anybody with pigment in their skin has issues with pulse oximetry, like just checking your pulse with these little devices. Because they weren't developed, they were developed for lily white people, right? So so now we're going to be able to kind of indicate maybe where research needs to be done. But one of the clever ways of doing this is kind of this human in the loop model. And so clinical, because these are instances where you can't just say why and you have some sort of pedantic conversation with the caregivers. So in terms of unstructured data too, there's literally thousands of systems that may be keeping track of the patient, but then they have they're kept track of in a different object level or something along those lines. So you're going to have to contextualize. And so a lot of these models are being built with broad understanding of these systems, communication systems, how you actually work. One additional area to that
Kevin,
point.
sorry to cut you off, man. It's time.
Oh yeah.
It's time. So if you have
back to you.
if you have additional questions for Kevin or Josh, feel free to jump back into the conference room. You can talk more there. And one more round of applause for Josh.